Welcome to another episode of Then, Now, and How. We're here with Heather B. Moore, Stephanie D. Sorensen, and yes, I know your name, Stephanie, and Michelle Wilson, that's me. This week we are covering Alma chapters 17 through 22. There is a lot to cover here, so we're just going to turn the time over to Heather so she can give us all the thens.
I have a lot of thens. This
So
is
many
awesome,
thens.
These are great these are great story chapters. I'm excited about this. Like this is like the kind that are easy to like teach your kids about. There's so much storyline.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the favorite, I think, primary lessons for sure. So
all I have to say is the arms. That's it. Everyone's like, yeah.
Ammon in the arms. So basically we are now, so we've been in Zarahemla following Alma the Younger along with Amulek and their teachings. And now we're going to jump backwards in time to what happened with the sons of Messiah, who were, of course, with Alma the Younger when he was first visited by the angel. So the next chapter actually covers 91 to 77 BC. So we're in Alma 17. And so we're going to be dealing with some multiple time periods. I hope to keep you all straight. So in 77 BC, Alma the Younger is heading toward Manti, and he all of a sudden meets the sons of Messiah who are now returning to Zarahemla. So this is pretty cool. This is a great missionary reunion. It's been 14 years since they've seen each other. And so on verse 5, we start into what happened on their mission, beginning with the first year of the reign of the judges. Because remember, so the sons are Ammon, Aaron, Omner, and Himni. And Aaron is the one that the people wanted to be king, but he gave up becoming the king, which is actually really good. Because I'm just going to give you this quick bird's eye of like this whole situation of Messiah. Well, first, remember when this is like a few episodes ago when Messiah decided to separate church and state. And so he had Alma the elder being the president of the church because of all the unrighteousness going on. They wanted to like separate, like, when do you need to be disciplined by the church or when are you actually doing criminal activity? So this ends up being a huge, huge blessing because because if you remember in previous episodes, we've talked about how when there is a king in these nations, whether it's a Lamanite or a Nephite king, they have like control over everything, not only the people, the civil laws, but also anything religious. So if you remember King Noah, he was a wicked king, which meant the people were kind of forced, some of them were forced to do wicked things because they had to uphold whatever Noah's laws were. And so now we have so now we have this, the kingship dissolved. And so there's no longer a king, which means if a Lamanite decides to join their church, he does not have to be subservient to a Nephite king, which makes it so much easier for the Lamanites because before this happened, if the Lamanites said, oh, I believe in the Nephite religion, all of a sudden King Messiah is their king. And that's a little hard for them to stomach at this point. And so it's a huge blessing because now the four sons of Messiah go into these Lamanite territories and they can convert the Lamanites and the Lamanites can accept the gospel, but they're not going to be executed or sent out of their country because now they have to answer to the Nephite king and they're considered a traitor in their own country. So they could stay a Lamanite, they can stay in their villages and their homes, and they can still have the gospel in their lives.
So Heather, am I understanding correctly that you're saying that when they convert now, they're converting to the Lord, they're converting to the church, but they're not converting to a nation or converting to another king? Yeah.
They're not necessarily saying, I now have to be a Nephite. I mean, they could call themselves a Nephite, but they don't have to be subservient to the Nephite king. They can still stay in their country and their land. They don't have to pay taxes to the Nephite king or anything because church and state is now separated. So it sets up this whole...
Sorry to interrupt.
Story.
It makes me think about like in the Latter-day Church, how initially it was, let's all the saints gather together. We're all going to be in Zion. And then when we started building our numbers together, then they shifted the focus and said, wherever you are, establish Zion there. You don't have
Mhm.
to come, here. You don't have to be together. And that's one of the ways that the church really started to grow, was because you had these saints that lived in these different states, in these different cities, and now all around the world. And so, because they did this, I'm looking all the way ahead to like Alma the Lamanite, would he have been even around if they had to come and convert to being a Nephite and coming to live in Zarahemla? So that's just so cool how the Lord works and how he lets his kingdom on earth expand.
Yeah, and if you think about about the very beginning of the Book of Mormon, where you have Lehi and Sariah and their family, and how you have this dissension start even as they leave Jerusalem, there's contention, and then once they hit the promised land, the families totally divide. So this part of the Book of Mormon is where they finally can start to heal their past and finally start to join, and the Lamanites can finally start to convert. And so this is like a huge, like, full circle moment.
That's so cool.
So, okay. So let's go back to Alma 17, where Ammon is kind of telling, what happened, which is really cool. So we know that Ammon shows up in the land of Ishmael, which is ruled over by King Lamoni. And King Lamoni is a descendant of Ishmael. And basically, King Lamoni, Ammon gets captured, and this happens over and over. He gets captured because he is a Nephite. He is a prince. And he's brought before King Lamoni, and King Lamoni is very suspicious. What do you want? And Ammon just says, I want to live here. But the way he says it, though, is he says he desires to dwell among the people. This is in verse 23, and perhaps until the day I die. So this is actually reminiscent of a blood oath or an oath on your life. If you remember back in First Nephi, when Zoram, who is a servant of Laban, leaves with Nephi and his brothers, and he also makes an oath. And even though Ammon doesn't say "on my life" or "as the Lord liveth," which were the common oath promises, this oath that Ammon does make, it tells King Lamoni that that Ammon is going to be true to his word. So they take their oaths very, very seriously. And it has to do with like your integrity. And if you say, I'm going to do something until I die or upon my life, and then you don't do it, then that gives people around you, the right to really take your life so because I thought, well, why the heck would Lamont, when I say, okay, now you can have one of my daughters for your wife, that's like a huge,
that's so sudden.
Huge leap. Jump. But it goes back to when he says, I am willing to live here until I die. So he is making this oath. He's not saying, I'm going to live here for a year or two, then I'm going to go back and be a prince in Zarahemla. So that's kind of a cool part of it. The other thing too is of course we know the story of when Ammon is like, yeah, I'll be your servant. I'll do whatever you want. And so he gets sent to help guard the king's flocks. And then he ends up defending the flocks against some bandits, and they, enter into this skirmish. And so Ammon cuts off the arms of the bandits. And I thought, wow, that's so violent and so extreme and intense. But that's how their war trophies were, is you would take the arm, and then that was how you would count the number of men that you had killed. And it also becomes, like I mentioned, like kind of a trophy. Like, I did this thing, I was protecting the king's flocks. And so that's why they bring the arms back to the king, is it's like proof, and also saying he really did kill these men. He's not just making a tall tale, I just killed 20, bandits, and how some people are. But
speaking of bandits, yes.
Yes. So then we go to 18, and 18 is such a beautiful conversion story, where the servants of King Lamoni, first, of course, they testify and say, wow, Ammon is this, super strong guy. He's so powerful. He has to be the Great Spirit. You might think, what is a Great Spirit? So through the Lamanite retellings and lore, is that they've been taught that there's a Great Spirit out there who is kind of, a higher power. So Lamoni thinks, wow, maybe Ammon is a Great Spirit. And of course he's like, where did Ammon go? And Ammon is feeding the horses in preparation, because Lamoni and his court, they're going to go travel to visit the father of King Lamoni. So this tells us that King Lamoni, he's actually a lesser king. He's not the most powerful king in the land. He's the king of the land of Ishmael, but he has to report to his father. So his father is like the high king, which also limits Lamoni's power and abilities. So he has to kind of do what his dad tells him to do. If his dad says, we're going to worship the jaguar, then they're all going to worship the jaguar, right? So Lamoni, even when he's converted, he doesn't really have a lot of power to like change his people's religion or to give them the freedom to practice religion. He still has to go through his dad, or it might even create some sort of civil war if he doesn't do that. Anyway, so we know that that King Lamoni, he's so starstruck over Ammon, and Ammon gives Ammon a chance to say, no, my power, I'm not the great spirit, but I could tell you about the power of God. And so he teaches them about the creation and the prophets and Lehi and Ishmael's experiences in the wilderness and the plan of redemption. And it seems that King Lamoni is kind of a little bit awestruck about maybe the other side of the story. You know how you might hear family stories and you hear what your parents tell you, and you go to a big reunion and you say, oh, I didn't know Aunt Bethany did this and did that. I thought she was like this. So now Lamoni is hearing the Nephite side of the story, which I'm sure has been greatly, greatly altered through the centuries, especially by the Lamanites. So then in Alma 19, this is one of my favorite chapters in the Book of Mormon, because we meet two remarkable women. They're both Lamanites. One is a servant. Her name is Abish, and the other is the queen. She is a wife of Lamoni. We don't know her name, but when King Lamoni hears all these things from Ammon, he also is struck by the power of God. And so he collapses to the earth and he lies as if dead for 2 days. And his wife and his children, everyone at court, they think, wait, is he dead? What's happened? And according to customary burial practices during the time, is the body of the king would be placed in the sepulcher. And so for her not to do it right away, it means that she maybe has like the seed of faith, or she's questioning, is he really dead? Because if we don't put in the sepulcher, then it attracts wild animals to our little kingdom, and we might have to be fighting off whatever the wild animals are. And then I don't know what makes her hesitate, but obviously we learn later that it's the spirit that does. So she has been in mourning for 2 days, and she's probably getting a lot of mixed messages of, well, he died. I mean, Ammon, this enemy, our Nephite enemy, somehow killed him, and we should probably put Ammon in prison again.
Everything was fine until he got here.
Yeah. Everything was fine. Exactly. So she finally asks Ammon to come, and she asks him to go and see the king and to tell her if he is dead. And so this, to me, is really showing her faith is starting to show itself. And Ammon returns and he says, the king is not dead. And then this is Alma 19:9, and he says, believest thou this? And she replies, I have no witness save thy word and the word of our servants. Nevertheless, I believe that it shall be according as thou hast said. So this is pretty amazing. So she is believing, even though she can see for herself that he hasn't moved for 2 days. And back then, maybe they didn't know enough to listen to a heartbeat or something. But as far as everybody is concerned, that he is probably dead. And then he says, so she says, I believe what you're saying. And then he says, this is in verse 10, blessed art thou because of thy exceeding faith. I say unto thee, woman, there has not been such great faith among all the people of the Nephites. And this just really strikes me every time I read it, because Ammon is telling this woman that she has more faith than anyone he has ever met. And who's Ammon? I mean, his best friend was Alma the Younger. He grew up under Alma the Elder, and his father is King Messiah, and his grandfather is King Benjamin.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really remarkable, I think, that he sees this faith in her, this Lamanite queen who is basically believing a stranger who is an enemy to their people, that her husband is not dead. And then, of course, the good news is that he really isn't dead. And then we move a little bit into Abish's story. And we might ask ourselves, so who is Abish and why was she so important at this time? Abish was a servant. She lived in the land of Israel, or the land of Ishmael, her whole life, which meant that she would have been worshiping the false idols and she would have been taught false truths. But somehow she had already been converted to the Lord on account of a vision from her father. Yet that it kind of reminds me of how she has the gospel in her home, but she can't go outside of her home with it. She can't tell her neighbors. She can't maybe fall in love and tell her husband or raise her children in the gospel because going against the king's rule could ostracize her from society. It could bring her some sort of punishment. It can turn her into a criminal. And so she's had to keep this testimony of hers private for so long. And then, of course, we know that she becomes a huge instrument in kind of stopping the people from really rising up and being upset about Ammon being in their court and teaching these things and causing their
She
king.
keeps them from assuming the worst.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
She keeps pointing them to be hopeful. Yeah.
And it reminds me of when we talked about Zeezrom, when he was a citizen of Ammonihah, and he rose up and said, you guys know me and I know you, we've done business together, but here I am testifying of the truth of what Alma is saying, because he came and he ministered to my home and he blessed my family.
You're talking about Amulek, right? Not Zeezrom.
Oh yeah. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Amulek. Yeah. I'm sorry. Back up. But yeah. So remember when Amulek went through his whole conversion and his whole testimony, and this is something that Abish does as well, but unlike Amulek, she doesn't get cast out for it. She's able to kind of calm the storm. And then in Alma 20, we learn this in verse 8, it says, we learn that King Lamoni's father is a king over all the land, which we talked about earlier about how the high king is making the decisions for all the other kings. And then let's see, later on, it just goes to Alma 21. This jumps to the experiences of Aaron teaching the Amalekites, and he also gets thrown into prison. Then he's rescued by Ammon and Lamoni, and then later they go and teach Lamoni's father about the creation and God, the plan of redemption, and King Lamoni's father also has an experience where he is struck as if dead. So I think those are all. This is kind of just a giant overview of the whole section, but I think it's, like we mentioned, it's kind of one of the more impactful set of scriptures that definitely brings up some great stories and great spiritual experiences.
In my little Book of Mormon Happy Valley place, I feel like Ammon and Abish got married. There's nothing scriptural, people. Don't write any letters.
If they were figurines, that's how you would have played it out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. If I had my little Ammon figurine and my little Abish,
an Abish Barbie.
Here he is. He's like, I've never met anyone with so much faith. You're so pretty. Wouldn't that just be awesome? If anyway.
Yes.
I am excited to hear her full story someday.
Me too.
What was that dream, that vision that her father had? And then how did they talk about it? And how did she just always believe? And yeah, so cool. So cool. All right. That was a fantastic overview of, there's many, many things going on in this. So thank you so
super
much.
Then.
Mm-hmm.
Super then. Okay. Stephanie, do you have any now?
Yeah, I do have a little now. Okay. In Alma 17, in verse 8, I'm just going to point out a couple of random things that stood out to me for the first time reading this that I just hadn't noticed before. It says, it's speaking about Alma the Younger and the sons of Mosiah. It says, they departed into the wilderness with their numbers, which they had selected. And I was like, oh, wait, there's more of them. Like in my mind, I've always pictured this of like the 5 of them, like running across a field of daisies, reuniting with each other and having all of this joy and stuff like that.
Slow motion.
Slow motion. Yeah. Yeah. But then it's cross-referenced to Alma chapter 17. Sorry. I've got the wrong verse, but I went and I looked it up. If you look up under selected, the footnote A, it takes you to another verse earlier that talked about how there were many others that went with them. And so I thought it was cool just to think about that. They had mission companions, it was like a little small missionary army, and they were out there doing that work together. In verse 9, it says, it came to pass that they journeyed many days in the wilderness. They fasted much and prayed much that the Lord would grant unto them a portion of his spirit to go with them and abide with them. And then this is the purpose, that they might be an instrument in the hands of God, to bring about, if possible, the Lamanites to the knowledge of the Lord. So I got stuck thinking about this idea of being an instrument in the hands of God, because I recently listened to another podcast where someone was saying that is like, for her, that's the happiest feeling she has in her life, was that anytime she feels like she's really being an instrument in God's hand, that's like there's nothing that brings more joy. And so I've been thinking about that, and I found a talk from October 2006 General Conference. It was given by Elder Don R. Clark, and it's called Becoming Instruments in the Hands of God. And as I was reading, I read the whole talk, and I was just so touched by a story that he shared about his grandfather. And so I have decided to break whatever fake rules we have for our podcast, and I'm going to read you this story because I just thought it was great. And so Elder Clark said this of his grandfather. And again, the purpose is that we're trying to understand what it means to be an instrument in the hands of God, like Ammon, the sons of Mosiah, Alma. Elder Clark said, 1919 was a year of great financial difficulty for all the people in grandfather's town. Farms were being foreclosed and businesses were going broke. There was a sizable mortgage on his farm, and grandfather received a statement saying he would have to pay $195 in order to carry the mortgage over for another year. For him, paying this bill was like demanding a pound of flesh. Nearly everyone was in the same condition, and it seemed impossible to obtain that much money. If he had gathered everything that the farm produced, the horses, cows, and machinery, he could not have sold them for $195. Grandfather asked a neighbor to butcher 2 or 3 of his cows, and he sold them and some other products. He had extended credit to his neighbors with the understanding that they would pay at the end of the year, but none of his debtors was able to pay him. The economic situation for his family was bleak. In his journal, grandfather recounts. And so these are the words of his grandfather, like directly from his journal. And this is what I just thought was the sweetest thing ever. He says from the journal, I shall never forget that cold evening just before Christmas of 1919. It looked as though we would lose the farm. My daughter Gladys laid a slip of paper in my hand and said, "This came in the mail today." I took it to her mother and asked her what it was. I forgot to mention his grandfather was blind, so he had to have someone read it to him. And the note said, Dear Brother Larson, I've had you on my mind all day today. I am wondering if you are in financial trouble. If you are, I have $200 you may have. The letter was signed Jim Drinkwater. Jim was a small, crippled man, and he would have been the last man on earth that anyone would have thought had that much money on hand. I went to his house that night, and he said, Brother Larson, I received a wireless message from heaven this morning, and I could not get you off my mind all day. I was sure you were in financial trouble. Brother Drinkwater gave me $200, and we sent the $195 to the mortgage company, and with the extra $5, we bought boots and clothes for the children. And then this is what Elder Clark says. My grandfather then goes on to bear his testimony in his journal. Quote, the Lord has never let me down. He has touched the hearts of others as he touched the heart of Brother Drinkwater. I bear witness that the only safety and security that I have ever found has come through trying to keep the commandments of the Lord and upholding and sustaining the authorities of the church. And Elder Clark says this about the story about his grandfather. He says, I have thought about Jim Drinkwater many times and wondered how he came to be the one that the Lord could trust. Jim was a little crippled man that God trusted to help a blind farmer with a heavy mortgage and 3 children. I have learned a great deal from my grandfather's experience with Jim Drinkwater, and then I bolded this phrase. I have learned that a person does not need to have a church calling, an invitation to help someone, or even good health to become an instrument in God's hands. And I just thought that was such a sweet story, because I thought we may read this story about the sons of Mosiah and think, well, I can't just like leave my kingdom and leave my people and just head out to the lands of my enemies and start preaching the gospel. But can we have that same focus about being an instrument in the hands of God? Elder Clark went on to say, the missionary experiences of the sons of Mosiah help us to understand how to become instruments in God's hands. It came to pass that they journeyed many days in the wilderness. That's from verse 17, verse 9. We must be willing to journey. The sons of Mosiah were willing to step outside their surroundings and do that which was uncomfortable. Had Ammon not been willing to journey into a foreign land inhabited by a wild and hardened and a ferocious people, he would never have found and helped Lamoni and his father, and many Lamanites may have never learned about Jesus Christ. God has asked us to go journey, to go on missions, to accept callings, to invite someone to church, or to help someone to need. And then he goes on to teach about how the sons of Mosiah gave us an example by fasting and praying so that they could be an instrument. And his final thoughts were, do we really want to be instruments in God's hands? If so, our desire will permeate our prayers and be the focus of our fasts. And I know that I've been taught many times by people that that can be our daily prayer. That can be our daily prayer, to say, how can I do your work today? Help me to know who to help, how to act, what to do. And that as we do, let the Lord make us instruments. He opens doors. He brings people into our path. I was thinking about this yesterday, and I flew on a plane to California. And I had also recently read President Nelson's 100th birthday post, where he says that he's been thinking about the 100 and the 99 and the 1, because he's entering his 100th year. And so he said that for his birthday, he wants us to look for the 1, for the 100th, right? The 100th person, and do something for them. So when I was flying on the airplane yesterday, I had that in my mind, and I've been thinking about this idea of being an instrument in God's hands. And I sat next to a young man, probably 19 years old, on the plane. It was just the two of us on our little small aisle. And as we took off, we experienced a lot of turbulence, and I could tell that he was scared. He was scared. He was fidgeting. He was heavy breathing. And so I said to him, I said, "Are you nervous?" And he said, "Yes." And I reached over and I held his hand. And I just talked him through breathing. And I was actually like grateful, because when I had read President Nelson's challenge, I had thought to myself, I want to do that. I want to take this challenge and reach out to the 1. And then immediately God gave me an opportunity to do that. And I could feel it. Like I could feel that God was letting me help someone that he loved. And so I just wanted to share that testimony and repeat Elder Clark's words, that do we really want to be instruments in God's hands? If so, our desire will permeate our prayers and be the focus of our fasts. And I have a testimony that the Lord will answer those prayers and provide us opportunities to be instruments, and that can truly bring us joy. I have one more small thing, but both of you have like blinky eyes. So I'm wondering, Michelle, if you have something you'd like to say.
Well, it's such a good topic. And we have our callings, and of course in our families, and of course being ministering brothers and sisters. But and hopefully that's part of our prayer as a ministering brother and a sister. We have people that we've been asked to by the Lord to minister to. Are we praying, how can I be an instrument in your hands to serve them? But it can even just be beyond that. Like you and this person on the plane, you weren't assigned. Years ago, I had a hysterectomy, and right after the hysterectomy, I went through this. It was a really hard couple of days where I'm like, I didn't feel like a woman anymore. I didn't feel feminine, and I just, when you're in hard times, sometimes you don't really think logically, And it was just a really hard time. And this sweet woman named Jean showed up. She's like, I know I'm not your visiting sister, and this is super random, but here's some lotion and a bubble bath. And I want a candle. It was a lotion and a candle. And then she like left, like super apologizing. I'm so sorry to bother you. And she was really nervous to do it. We weren't like terribly close. And so that night I'm in the bathroom and I'm brushing my teeth, getting ready for bed. And I saw the lotion there. And so I just opened it up and I, rubbed it on my arms, and it was this floral smell. And I began to cry because it had been the first time since my surgery that I thought, okay, I'm going to be okay. I'm still me, even though I had this. And it was the first time that I felt like a woman again. And it was so meaningful. And it was all because just she had this random impression. And we talked about it later. And she's like, I was so scared because it sounded so stupid. She was walking through the store and the spirit said, buy Michelle some lotion and a candle. She didn't even know that I had surgery. She thought, that is so dumb. But it was one of those things where it was this beautiful moment in my life, a gift that God gave me through her. So I firmly believe when you're praying for that, he will use you. He's up there looking for people to use.
Yeah. I remember, well, I've had a few experiences that probably like your friend Michelle, where I like second guess myself and I'll like think, and I think, well, it's too late. They already had this, or it was their birthday 3 days ago. And I just remembered it and I feel dumb, like texting them or saying something or stopping in. And then then I just tell myself, just do it. It's okay. It's better late than never. But one time I remember I had gone through a hard time. I lost a child. And I remember it was like about 3 or 4 days after it. And I was sitting on my front couch and I could see like my blinds are kind of partially, but I could see, cars coming and going. And I saw 2 of my neighbors approach my porch and I was like, oh, like, they're so nice. They're so sweet. They're going to come say hi and just say sorry or whatever. And they just talked and talked. They talked outside for like 10 minutes and then they left. And I was like, I wonder what happened. So one of my kids came in the house later and said, oh, Mom, there's a little plant on the doorstep. And I was like, oh, that's so nice. Thank you. But I remember sitting there hoping they would knock on my door and visit me, even though it'd probably been, it's awkward to go and talk to someone after a loss, I think. But I always felt, how many times have I done that? Like driven past and thinking I should stop, or gone up and left a card on the door instead of knocking on the door. And so it kind of really taught me, that following through with that prompting can really make a difference. Not that I don't appreciate anything, but I just remember sitting there feeling that way. And it just kind of taught me how other people might feel.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing both of those things. I think that leads into this last thing. And this is a very different thing than I'd ever gotten out of these chapters before, but it just struck me, and it goes along with kind of this idea of ministering that you're both talking about as well. In Alma chapter 20, Ammon the voice of the Lord came to Ammon and basically told him that his brethren were in prison. And so we can see in verse 3, it says, it came to pass that when Ammon had heard this, he said unto Lamoni, which is his recent little convert and buddy, behold, my brother and brethren are in prison at Madoni, and I go that I may deliver them. And then this stood out to me for the first time ever. Now Lamoni said unto Ammon, I know in the strength of the Lord thou canst do all things, but behold, I will go with thee. And I thought, that is so sweet. Like, he knew that this was going to be hard and that Ammon was probably worried and scared about his brethren and didn't know what he could do. But Lamoni says, look, I know you trust the Lord and I trust the Lord, but I'm coming with you. And it just made me think so much about the power of friendship and kindness and ministering. In April 2014, Elder Rasband gave a talk called The Joyful Burden of Discipleship. And he said, reaching out to rescue one another under any condition is an eternal measure of love. Often we are given the opportunity to help others in their time of need. As members of the church, we have the sacred responsibility to bear one another's burdens that they may be light, to mourn with those with mourn, and to lift up the hands which hang down and strengthen the feeble knees. And I thought, that is so sweet. That is what Lamoni did for Ammon. He said, that sounds hard. I'll come with you. Even though we believe in Jesus, I will come with you.
Even though you could probably do it without me, I
Right.
will come with you.
I'll
Right.
come with you. And I love that. And I kind of thought, man, wouldn't it be awesome if I could remember this phrase anytime that I have a friend or a loved one going through a hard time, that I could have the courage to say, but behold, I will go with thee.
Mhm.
Right.
Or I will sit with thee, or I will
I will
cry
sit with
with
you.
thee.
I will
I
go
will
with you to that doctor's appointment.
I will eat ice cream with you.
Yes, I will go. Where are you going? Where are
Yeah.
you at? I will go with you. Right. And then just to follow up with that, the prophet Joseph Smith said the following. He says, I don't care what a man's character is. If he's my friend, a true friend, I will be a friend to him and preach the gospel of salvation to him and give him good counsel, helping him out of his difficulties. Friendship is one of the grand fundamental principles of Mormonism. It is designed to I can't say the word all of a sudden, revolutionize and civilize the world and cause wars and contentions to cease and men to become friends and brothers.
Mm.
And literally, like days or weeks before, these two men were total enemies, right? Ammon
Well,
and
and Lamoni was off
Lamoni.
like killing people that made him mad. I mean,
Right.
he was not awesome. And he was like,
Yeah.
I'll go with you.
Yeah. But here they have, because of the shared experience they have with the gospel and conversion, they have become friends and brothers. And this, behold, I will go with thee, is an expression of friendship and loyalty. And I just thought it was really beautiful and something that we can learn a lesson from.
But I think it's important to note too that King Lamoni went with Ammon when he was serving the Lord
Mhm.
and going on a mission to do what God asked him to do. Sometimes we have friends that are hurting that might walk away from the church or go to different places that aren't good for them. And in those cases, I don't think necessarily being a good friend means, I know you're struggling, so I'm going to leave here. I'm going to leave the tree and go with you. We
Right.
need to stay by the tree. But when
Yeah.
we have friends that are really struggling and going through hard things, it's good to practice faith with each other
Yeah.
and
That's a great point.
to believe in each other. But no, when I was reading that again, this stuck out to me too for the first time. I wrote down super cool friend. Like, how cool is that?
Yeah.
And we're going to find out next week how important it was. Actually just this week in the reading, how important it was that King Lamoni was there.
Yeah.
And then Ammon returned his sign of friendship when he's like, when his, King Lamoni's dad was like, I'm going to kill you. And Ammon jumps up and says, no, you're not. I mean, what a sweet friendship that has to be. Very cool.
And it's cool. Like the Lord knew that they needed each other for this next challenge.
Yeah.
Like Lamoni needed Ammon to be able to resolve the conflict that Heather kind of already brought up about with the higher king, right? To be able to like live this newly converted life. He needed Ammon's help to be able to convince his father, and Ammon needed Lamoni's help to be able to even approach the father without being killed, right?
Yeah.
And so
which will in turn save his other friends.
yeah. Yeah. And so, like, it seems like a really simple thing for Lamoni to say, I'll go with you, but it helped the Lord accomplish his purposes. Again, an instrument in the hands of the Lord. Yeah.
Oh, and maybe it wasn't easy for him. So he's leaving the kingdom. And now that he's been converted, he has to go and face other Lamanite kings,
Mhm.
even his father, as someone who's converted to God. And who knows, his father was worse than he was. He could have been walking into his own death by being with his friend. Super admirable. All right. Well, thank you so much for both of you. I just had something quick to share. So last week, just on the how part, I talked a little bit about keeping faith when those around you are suffering. It can be really, really hard. The thing that stuck out to me today, this time in a reading, was in Alma 17, when they had all come together. In verse 11, It said, the Lord said unto them, go forth among the Lamanites, thy brethren. Oh, right before this in verse 10, it came to pass that the Lord did visit them with the Spirit and said unto them, be comforted. And they were comforted. So I love that. This is right after they said, we want to be an instrument in thy hands. So he says, be comforted. And then the Lord said unto him, go forth among the Lamanites, thy brethren, and establish my word. Yet ye shall be patient in long suffering and afflictions, that ye may show forth good examples unto them in me. And I will make the instruments of thee in my hands unto the salvation of many souls. And so the question that I asked was, they're basically being told, you're going to go through some stuff.
Yeah.
They said, hey, we want to be an instrument in your hands. And he's like, yeah, be comforted, except maybe not so much, because it's going to be really, really hard.
Yeah.
And so the question then is, what do we do when God doesn't save us or heal us? What do we do when we say, we have this grand, I want to be an instrument in your hands. And yes, I'll say yes to this calling. Yes, I will parent these children. Yes, I will take these new job. But we don't get the healing that we want or the help that we want. Not that he doesn't help us, but what do we do when we're in the middle of long suffering?
When the happily ever after doesn't come quite yet.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. When it's the not happily now.
Yeah.
And we're waiting for the happily ever after. But right now it's really, really hard. So I don't know if you guys watched The Chosen, but I love The Chosen. And so last week, was it last week or this week, Stephanie, that you were talking about breaking imaginary rules? Was that just today?
Today.
Yeah, today. So I'm going to break an imaginary rule, and I'm going to read a little bit from a conversation of the character of Jesus in the chosen. So this is not out of scripture, but the principle that was portrayed in this conversation was really, really powerful, especially in the light of when we are praying for healing or deliverance ourselves, why sometimes we don't get it. If we have a righteous desire, like when I had 2 kids naturally, and then fertility issues for 3 to 4 years before I had to get a medically necessary hysterectomy. And during those last 3 or 4 years, it was the righteous desire. Why can't I have more children? Why can't I have more children? So what happens when we're not healed and we're not given the comfort or the protection that we feel that we need? So in this conversation, the character of Jesus is talking to one of his apostles that he calls Little James. And in the show, Little James has a limp. And so it's the point where the disciples, the apostles, are about to go out on their different missions. And they're in a corridor, and little James just comes up to to Jesus. And again, I keep saying the character of Jesus because this is one of those scenes where it's part of the show, which is a creative depiction of the life of Jesus and the apostles, but it's not taken from the scriptures. And so little James just says, why haven't you healed me? And Jesus's response was, because I trust you. And then this is what he said. It was very sweet. He said, little James, precious James, I need you to listen to me very carefully, because what I'm going to say defines your whole life up to this point and will define the rest of your life. Do you understand? And little James nods, and I'm watching this and I'm nodding and I'm like, what's he going to say? And then the character of Jesus says, in the Father's will, I could heal you right now, and you'd have a good story to tell. Yes. And little James says, well, yes, that you can do miracles. And he says, well, yeah, that's a good story, Jesus says, but there are already dozens who can tell that story, and there will be hundreds more, even thousands. But think of the story you have, especially in your journey to come, if I don't heal you, to know how to proclaim that you still praise God in spite of this, to focus on all that matters so much more than the body, to show people that you can be patient in your suffering here on earth because you know how you will spend an eternity with no suffering. Not everyone can understand that. How many people do you think the Father and I trust this with? And I loved hearing that. I think there is such a beauty in having faith in your suffering. And then Jesus, the character, went on to say, are you fast? Do you look impressive when you walk? Maybe not. But these are things the Father doesn't care about. You're going to do more than most people ever dream. So many people need healing in order to believe in me, or they need healing because their hearts are so sick. That doesn't apply to you. And many are healed or not healed because Father in heaven has a plan for them, which may be a mystery. And remember what Job has said, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. When you pass through this earth and you meet your Father in heaven, where Isaiah promises you will leap like a deer, your reward will be great. And I bolded this part. So hold on a little longer. And when you discover yourself finding true strength because of your weakness, and when you do great things in my name in spite of this, the impact will last for generations. And I just think that is so powerful. The truth that sometimes God lets us hurt for our benefit and for his. A few years ago, and that is a hard concept because you hear a lot of people saying, why is there so much pain and suffering in the world? If God loved me, why would he let me hurt? That is a question that I asked as I was a teenager. If you love me, why are you letting me hurt? So years ago, well, about 10 or so years, 10 to 12 years ago, there was a sweet little 18-month-old that lived in our ward. Her name was Lucy, and her mom, Stephanie. Their family had just moved into this new house with a gas fireplace. Really cool. You just flip the switch, it turns on, flip the switch off, it turns off. They'd never had one before. So they were getting ready for church one morning, and my husband was bishop at the time. And Stephanie was in the kitchen, and Lucy was playing on the floor. And it took Stephanie just a second. She looked over and she saw Lucy put her hand on the glass pane of the fireplace and pull herself up. And Stephanie ran across and pulled Lucy off. And some of the palms of her hands had stayed on the fireplace glass. She had burned her hands severely. And that was right before church. So obviously they went to the emergency room, and it wasn't long before everyone around church was like, did you hear about Lucy? Did you hear about Lucy? And so the next night, I went with my husband. We went to their house, and we were sitting there, and I was just with them. And it was just such a sweet and tender time. I mean, as a parent, can you imagine an 18-month-old just seeing the suffering and the pain in her little hands? And then she had to excuse herself because she says that she had to stretch Lucy's hands, which tears the skin, the healing skin. Because if she didn't stretch her hands, then her hands would heal almost cupped. The skin would get tighter. So I asked Stephanie, I said, well, how long do you have to stretch your hands? And she said, I have to stretch her hands every hour. Every hour. The next Sunday I went to church, and they were there the very next Sunday, a week later. And I was in the bathroom, and I walked in, and Stephanie was there, and she put Lucy on the counter, and she said, okay, it's time to stretch your hands. And this sweet little baby gave her hand to her mom, and you could tell she was hesitant because she knew what was coming. And she stretched her little hand, and little Lucy winced. She didn't cry. And it was just a sweet, tender moment that I felt like I was interrupting. But just looking at that, just here is a mom who is willfully and willingly inflicting pain on her little child who doesn't fully understand, who trusts her mom so much that she says, here's my hand. If you say it is important, it must be important. And she stretched it, and she did that time and time and time and time again, because she loved little Lucy, 18-month-old Lucy, but she also loved the grown-up Lucy, who was going to write with her hands and maybe do gymnastics or dance or whatever. And it just made me think of God, how sometimes we bring pain upon ourselves, but sometimes God actually stretches us to the point where it hurts, because that is where the growth happens. That is where we can be stretched now, so later we can be stronger. Later we can fulfill a purpose, or he can fulfill a purpose in his life or in our life. So it just made me think about that, where there are a lot of afflictions, a lot of really, really difficult things that happen, but God does love us, and we can be patient in our afflictions. We can trust in the Lord. That's what we read in Alma 17, chapter 13. We can let him consecrate our affliction for our gain. That pain that little Lucy had to endure, that pain was consecrated for her gain. She's a teenager now. Her hands, a little bit of scarring, full functionality. They would not have been able to function fully the rest of her life if her mom would have said, you know what, that hurts, honey. Don't worry, we won't do it. It'll be fine. But her mom said, no, we're going to have to go through this pain so you can be fully functional. And that's what redemption is. We need to be spiritually fully functional. And this is what Jacob taught. He says, thou art my first, or Lehi taught to Jacob. He said, thou art my firstborn in the days of my tribulation, the wilderness. And behold, in thy childhood, thou hast suffered afflictions and much sorrow because of the rudeness of thy brethren. Nevertheless, Jacob, my firstborn in the wilderness, thou knowest the greatness of God, and he shall consecrate thine afflictions for thy gain. Sometimes we need to experience pain to grow. And sometimes we have to walk into the pain or hand it over to God and say, I know it's going to hurt. But when we do that, we turn our lives over to him and he can make us into something more than we can. So it was just a great reminder to me that discomfort that we feel does not mean that God doesn't love us. He loves us. And it's almost like, we were just talking about with King Lamoni. God's like, everything's possible and I'm with you. Like, he and Jesus Christ are our best friends. They are with us the whole time. Did you guys have any thoughts about that?
I love that. I think that's like hearing that story about the 18-month-old is sad, but it just drives home the point of how it's so true. Like our pain does make us grow and our tribulations. It teaches us to love unconditionally, because I'm sure that mother just doing that to her daughter, because I'm sure we've all had to experience something a little bit similar. I mean, it just makes you love that child unconditionally, and I will do anything to help you heal.
Yeah. And I think it also reminds of the principle of trust, right? That we're in the middle of that with that pain, when we're experiencing that pain. Mm-hmm. It takes courage for us to trust that things will be okay, to trust that it is for our good and that God can make something good out of it. And I think that's, he's testified of that to us so many times, right? That he will consecrate our afflictions for our good, that all will be well and all of those things. But, when we're in it and when we're feeling it, we're already fearful about so many things that it takes courage to say, I trust you. I trust you. This is going to be okay.
But who better to trust than God, than our Heavenly Father, who loves us more than we can imagine? So that is my big takeaway, is that Heavenly Father loves us, and that when we are experiencing pain, he can consecrate it for our good, and we are never alone. Well, thank you, my good friends. This was another great episode of Then, Now, and How. We're so grateful that you guys joined us. We hope that you are wanting to leave us a good rating. That would be fun. Share the podcast with others. And as always, stay tuned again for next week when we get to continue on with our study of the Book of Mormon. Until then, we'll see you.
Goodbye.